I almost missed the Kid Cake. The music mesmerized me. I was ensorcelled by that lullaby music I played at the beginning. You guys, welcome back. We did it again. We've done it again, you guys. Another Wednesday down. Well, hopefully not yet. It is 8 p.m. EST. Do you know where your children are? Well, I know where you should be. You should be watching Pencil to Pencil right now, live on your video scope, as Macho Man Randy Savage would call it. Let's do some intros, you guys. I am your first co-host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. I am a cartoonist in good standing on the board of the National Cartoonist Society. And also, on top of all of that, besides being a really handsome man, I'm also in the traditional book space. They call me an author illustrator. Leon the Extraordinary is my book series at Scholastic under the Graphics imprint. Is in stores now. The next book in the series, Leon, Worst Friends Forever, will be on sale in October of this calendar year. Go pre-order it, why don't you? You guys, I would be remiss if I did not introduce our co-host. You know what to do. Stand up and make that belt motion across your middle. That's right. Do it, Steve. Get into it. He is known in these streets as the world heavyweight champion of web comics. That's right. He's a legend in these streets. He goes by the name of Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Gentlemen, so good to see you. Good to see you.
Well, hello.
Yeah, my name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age, which you can read at middleagecomic.com. It's over on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics. And I also make TTRPG stuff. Stuff if you play the Dungeons and the Dragons.
And the Dragons, yes.
And the Dragons. You got your various books. We got a new Kickstarter launching tomorrow called Nibblemancy. And it's got the weirdest swag so far.
Go get it, Steve. Hold on, I got to put you on screen. What is that?
And I apologize, but it's an apron.
Yo!
So, if you're a fan of D&D artwork and the work of Jeff Easley, who is brilliant, this is the color scheme of the painting in the background here. Absolutely a nod to.
That's Unearthed Arcana, yeah.
Yep, you picked it. Unearthed Arcana. Totally in love with it.
I love it.
Silliest thing, but that launches tomorrow at nibblemancy.com. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Tower of Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the maestro of mark making, Mr. Mike Manley.
Yes, preach.
Good evening, ladies and joins, and all you can see, as they used to say in the old days. I draw two nationally or internationally syndicated comic strips.
Yes.
Judge Parker and the Phantom, the original superhero. And I also was actually even told a few times this week, I've drawn your childhood. So
that's a thing. Wow.
Yeah. I posted some old layouts or sketches, which I'm always coming across from my gigantic files of some Batman stuff. I like to post my old process, and I had people going, "That was my first comic."
Oh man!
So they're 90.
Yeah.
So
that's what
it's always interesting to and it's nice to get those comments. The people will be like, "Oh, that's my first comic," especially on places like Instagram, where I think you tend to come across more random people, in your feed, stuff like that. So,
Mike, how often does somebody say something to you and you go, "Wait, did I draw that?" Like, how's your recall on old jobs? Like, do you kind of slightly remember things? Do you remember things in seasons, or are there things that you just probably plainly forgot that you did?
The only thing that I think I've forgotten might have been sketches, but I think every job, I still pretty much remember every job that I worked on. I haven't reached that point where the buffer is starting to there's a scratch on the disc and it's laser starting to skip. But I have, in the last year or two, I've had people send me sketches that I did that I didn't remember doing. at some show in the 80s or a store appearance or something. So that's always interesting to see, because then you go kind of like, whoa.
Right. Was I on the bus when I drew that?
Right, yeah. You know, what happened to me that day, you know? It's kind of weird to see. I was talking to our mutual friend, Terry Beatty, who was was getting one of his series he did re-released. And it's odd to see something that you did, like Marvel or DC will reprint something from the 80s, and you go like, wow, you're looking at something you did, you know, at the beginning of your career. And some of it you're okay, and then some of it is kind of like cringe, like, well, why would I do that? Why did, you know, that hand should have been better.
Right.
You know, but I mean, that's life. As an artist, you can always go back and look at things that you go like, well, that wasn't too bad, and like, ooh, that's yeah, nobody should see that again.
Well, that's also, it comes from just being in the mix for so long, right? And I just came off of a run of school visits. I just did a school visit this afternoon, you guys. I might be a little punchy, and this is really messed up, and it's fun. I thought I wasn't going to talk about it. There was a fight at my last assembly today. Wasn't me. I wasn't fighting. But
you were fighting with the kids, Jamar?
No, the sixth graders just, it's rough the end of the day. Being in sixth grade, there was a little skirmish in the back of the auditorium.
Wow.
And kids were ushered out. And I kind of felt bad for them, because I remember being in sixth grade. It's a rough period to be.
What was the skins against the skins against the
shirts? But it was funny. A couple of kids after the assembly came up to me, and they had copies of Leon, and one of the kids showed it to me, and I had signed it already. He's like, "Look, I brought this book. You signed it." And I was just kind of recalling what you just talked about. It's funny. It's like, "Here, look, here's something that you did," and he like presented to you, and you go, "Cool, I guess I did do that." But they're very proud to kind of maybe connect with you in a way like, remember, we had a moment, and now we're recalling it here. And
that was equivalent to some kid standing next to Stan Lee. Or, William Shatner, and he's like leaning over and like, "Hi, come and get your picture, stay behind the glass."
Yeah, those are all so very weird. Steve, have you done a lot of those kind of like convention photos where you stand like it's 6 feet away from a celebrity?
I did one or two, but back in, like, I think it was with William Shatner maybe 10, 15 years ago, but it felt like getting your photo taken with like Mickey Mouse, or like, I thought, I'm going to have this heart-to-heart with my hero. And it was more like they shuffled you through so quick. You can just hear the ka-ching sound in his head as every person.
Right, exactly.
But also, I'm sure if you, on the other side of that, I'm sure like the celeb or whoever wants to have that moment. And it's like, oh, these guys stood in line for 45 minutes to meet me. And then they kind of put them behind this partition. Yeah. It's kind of cold, but I don't really think that the people wanted that. Well, maybe they do.
Right.
Right.
Grow up to be a mascot.
Hey, Gar, how are you? Well, we've been on a tear lately. Since we've come back, I guess we're in our 4th season or whatever of this you would call it.
5th season, Jamar.
You know what? I've said this from the beginning. Sometimes people would go like, "Yo, what guest do you have this week?" And I go, you know what? Sometimes we don't have a guest, and sometimes we do. I think either session is just as good as one or the other. You know what I mean? So I would be curious to know if people go, "Oh, it's just those 3 guys talking
again."
Yeah, or then it's like, "Oh, who's on this week?" So, and I usually say this, but I skipped it this time for the intro. Don't forget, we're not talking heads, ladies and gentlemen. We are all 3 expert cartoonists. That's right. Pinch me, cut me, do I not bleed? Cartoonists. So that's what makes our conversations, I think, interesting, even if we don't have a guest. So with that said, I want to give you guys some rules of engagement for tonight. Tonight we have a special guest. Stephen E. Gordon is in the green room. Fantastic animation legend. We have a lot to talk about. And if this is your first time joining us live, well, hello, you're going to have a great time. In the comments, if you're watching on YouTube, or in the replies, I think, on Facebook, type in a message to us, say hello. ask a question to Stephen or the rest of us, we would love to hear some chatter in the chat, but I cannot guarantee that we'll get it on air. I hope you'll be okay with that. So, Mike, why don't you intro Stephen, and then we're going to get this ball going.
Well, how do you introduce a man who's had such a amazing career full of he drew my childhood, right? He's worked in animation for decades with starting out with places like Ralph Bakshi. He's worked at Disney. He's was like, who hasn't he worked for? He's worked in features, character designer, director. It's just an amazing. Go to his IMDb or go to his website. You guys want to throw that up? Just look at the amazing variety and the track record that he has, and I can only imagine how much fun it must have been to do so many of these projects that he's worked on. So why don't we bring him in and he can tell us all about them?
That's right. He could tell you himself. All right, Stephen, get ready for beaming in. Make sure, guys. Welcome to Pencil, Stephen E. Gordon. You've been rendered. Hello. So is it okay if I call you Stephen just to keep the Steven thing?
Yeah, that's fine. I usually go by Steve, but under the circumstances, it's Steven.
Or we could just call him Conley. And then
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. All right, Mike, the floor is yours.
Well, I've wanted to talk to you, as you know, for a while, and we always have the beginning, especially with someone like you who's been working in the business for a while. Give us a little bit of your origin story, because now there's sort of like this whole business of how to get into the business, but when you started a little bit before me, there wasn't as much of a clear path or as a defined path to get into the business of animation or comics. So I was sort of interested in like your origin, like when did you get interested in, did you go to school, and how did you get to work with people like Ralph Bakshi and everything in the beginning?
Well, you're right. I mean, things are completely different now. And whenever kids ask me how'd I get in, kind of hoping, I think, to find a path for themselves, I tell them that you can't do it this way anymore. It's the way I did it, and most of my peers, you won't be able to do that. You have to go a different route. But how I got in was by accident. I had no intention of getting into animation. I was actually in high school putting together my portfolio to start submitting to art schools like Art Center, Pasadena, and places like that. And my intent was to get into illustration. Probably not the best of plans, but anyways, it was my art teacher happened to see a ad in the trade paper looking for artists' portfolio submissions. So she thought this would be a good way for me to get a portfolio review and to possibly take a little bit of the wind out of my sails. And because I was the kid in high school who was the artist and stuff, I'm sure most of you probably were as well. And, every high school seems to have one. And she thought that would be good to humble me a little bit too. And unfortunately, she was wrong on both accounts because no one gives portfolio reviews. You either get hired or you don't get hired. And you never know what was necessarily wrong with your portfolio other than it didn't cut it. And I got the job. So, that didn't work for either of her things that she'd planned. I got humbled later when I saw who else was hired, a bunch of really skilled people that had been through Art Center and other places. But other than that, I was hired by Ralph Bakshi to work on Lord of the Rings way back in 1977.
Wow. Yeah.
And basically just started out doing grunt work you need, if you're familiar with the film at all, you've seen the orcs, how he handled those, which was kind of a roto photo type of thing, a high contrast photo thing. And he needed people to kind of go in and add eyes and claws and all types of things to try to make it look better than just the live actors dressed up in weird bodysuits and stuff. And I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time when another animator, an actual animator, needed an assistant. So they moved me over to be his assistant. So I learned how to be an in-betweener, and then eventually Ralph saw someone that was probably too young and stupid not to know any better, and so he gave me this 100-foot scene of photos to animate on my own, or basically work the rotoscope on. And that was my first scene of animation. And even though it was rotoscope, it still took a lot of work and overtime to do. So I ended up getting an actual feature credit on that film, an animated credit.
Wow. Now, how old were you?
I was, I guess I missed that part of the story. Yes. So I got the job and I was 17.
Wow.
And my high school kind of went nuts, and they found a way for me to finish my senior year via adult school. So I still graduated with everyone, and I think they were very impressed because I think when I told them how much they were offering me, I was making more than they were.
Where was that in the world at that time?
That was Southern California.
Okay.
So I've been there my entire time. Or been here my entire time for the most part. That was in Granada Hills in California. And back, she was located on the Sunset Strip across from the Sunset and I'm blanking on the street names now suddenly. Anyways, Sunset Strip. Not the Sunset Strip, but Hollywood Sunset across from the Cinerama Dome.
Okay.
And so we were there for a while doing that, and he was hiring like a drunken sailor on leave because he just needed bodies. I mean, everyone in the industry at some point probably made their way through that film, or at least every new person in the thing. He had a lot of old time animators as well, like Irv Spence and Marty Travis and stuff. So,
Steve, I'm sorry, Mike. I want to throw this in real quick. Steve, so that being your first introduction into being in the business, and that was a pretty high profile project, was there a lot of what they call now in the business crunch? Like, were you like sleeping under a desk? And like, can you talk about the environment a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was because I think there was, for him, that was a huge budget movie at the time. I don't remember what it was, but everyone was towards, I'd say from about the middle to the end, we were working 80-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Often not leaving the place, but it was a union gig and he was paying union overtime. So it was great. I mean, I was making money hand over fist for a kid 17. My only previous job in art before that was doing portraits at Magic Mountain. So.
Wow. Now, were you familiar with like some of the other people in animation? Were you like you mentioned, like Irv Spence and people like that, a lot of the veterans that were helping him on and that stuff, or was that all new to you?
It was pretty new to me. I was familiar with animation in general, but I didn't have a clue who the 9 Old Men were or anything like that. I picked it up real quick because it was kind of part of the whole fabric and everything there. So I learned very quickly who everyone was and whatnot. And Irv, I didn't know that Irv was but if you ever saw Irv, I mean, he looked like sophisticated animator. He could never stay there long enough to work because he was always off playing golf, and it's kind of his thing. He would bang out stuff and then take off the rest of the day to go play golf, and very sophisticated. smoked a pipe and, just very erudite,
Were there any things that I'm so fascinated in this kind of like new car smell, Steve? Like this, like you're in it, everything's swirling around you. You're making a lot of money at a young age. Were you so entwined in just being in the process and making art that you weren't even thinking about the money? As a 17-year-old, that seems like a kind of a contradiction, but like, were you so like deep into the art that you weren't thinking about getting paid for it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a single guy living in my parents' home at that time. But about midway through, I think I moved out with a friend. Probably about the time I was 18 or something. So money was a little more of an issue then. But
Right.
No, it was great money, and I was putting it away, and it was wonderful. I mean, what was most interesting was all the other artists, because in high school you think, I'm the best thing around, and then you see other people. It's like, oh shit, these. It's funny. One of the background artists that he hired, her name's Carol Police now, I believe. It was Carol Kiefer before, something like that. I had actually been going to Art Center as an after-school life drawing class that she was teaching. So it was funny. I was hired there before she was. That was kind of interesting. I think she was rather shocked to see me there. So,
and for our viewing audience, if you could break down even that, like I know when you said you had 100 feet of film, which is so many seconds of film, which is so many drawings. And if he was rotoscoping, so would he print them all out and then you would draw over the top of them? Is that what was going on a light box?
Well, yes, 100 feet is a long scene, as you're probably familiar. It's unheard of even in this day and age for a 100-foot scene. But it was a scene of Aragorn and Gandalf riding their horses while I believe Gandalf was giving some narration. It was kind of a way to cover up the exposition that was necessary. So you see them riding their horses, and there's the big moon in the background and stuff. And what I was doing, yes, they had printed out every photo. And generally what you do is you go through and you pull out the extremes, the key photos and stuff, and ignore the rest. Unfortunately, when you get two horses riding side by side like that, every drawing is an extreme.
Right.
So, and I think he knew that. It took a little bit of advantage of me, which is fine. But I learned a heck of a lot by the time I finished that scene, and then he started giving me other stuff too. So he moved me out of in-betweening and into animating. So
right. Yeah. Well, and you learned how to draw a horse, which is
yes. I have been drawing horses ever since, and it's still kind of a main thing that I do. I'm kind of known for my animal animation and stuff. So
really, because I get the feeling, obviously incorrectly, that you're more known for or maybe to the fans, you're more known for your character designs of certain shows.
Yes, yes. As far as the fans are concerned, X-Men Evolution, Swan Princess, stuff like that is what I'm known for. And Cool World, even though I didn't design the characters, I animated Holly and Lynette. That's kind of big. But as far as studios know, they're looking for someone to do 2D animal animation on that list. So there's not a lot of people out there that can do it and make it look realistic. So
right. So I just find that sort of so interesting that you were learning all of these skills, like drawing animals, which is not easy, or like just all the technical aspects of animating, like all the mouth charts and all that. If you had two guys riding on a horse, you got multiple tasks you got to deal with. Like, so were you just doing?
There was no dialogue on that.
Oh, okay.
So that made that a little bit easier, because dialogue is a whole nother skill to learn. You're right. but I did have to untangle their capes quite a bit. Had to figure out the capes dragging off in the, because often in the photographs it was nothing but a blur, except maybe every occasional one that caught, was clear on the photos. But most of the time I had to figure out how to make those work. So
yeah. I mean, I guess that's one of the things that people don't really understand about rotoscoping. I mean, because Disney did it too, but it's like you have to. It's like tracing a photograph. If you just trace a photograph, it's going to look kind of weird, right? Because you have to sort of fix things. There's things you accept in the photograph because it's real. When you turn it into a flat or a 2D drawing, it won't look right.
Yeah, and often you also have to exaggerate it. I was not at that point doing it, but by the time I got to Fire and Ice, exaggeration was important. You couldn't just trace, maybe not the exact right term, but you couldn't just follow the photos exactly. You had to use them more as a leaping off point.
So was that sort of your graduation? I mean, your college, that production, because you must have learned so many different things on that production. And then after that, what was your next?
Yeah, well, I mean, the funny thing about it is I still, even though I was making good money and learning all this stuff, I still, animation is probably not what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to school after this is over. This is just a way to, put some money away and, summer job, even though it was longer than a summer. Mm-hmm. And I started dating at that point. Well, dating isn't, went out a couple of times with a daughter of one of the animators there, who used to be one of Milt Call's assistants, Sam James. So I went out with her a couple of times, I think, and she'd said, "So what are your plans?" Because she's obviously knew this world a lot more than I did. Mm. And I said, "I'll probably leave this and go, back to, going to school." And she said, "No, no one gets out. Artists do not get out of here." So then she turns out she was right. So
oh, that's fantastic.
So my next, I think after Lord of the Rings, I think I stayed with Ralph through Hey Good Looking and American Pop, I believe. Yeah, and I'd have to get my IMDb page out to know what came next. But and then I went to Filmation, and I was just doing character layout on shows like Zorro and I think a little bit of Tarzan, a little bit of Flash Gordon, but mostly on the Lone Ranger. Mm. I was fortunate to share an office with Dave Stevens. Oh, so that was fun, and we got to know each other quite well, and even double dated once. Or went to a concert together or something. But and Russ Heath was also in the office, and we had a lot of fun making fun of him. So.
And I take it that's when also, since it's the Lone Ranger, drawing horses came in.
Yes, that came in very handy. Again, like I said, I keep hitting horses over and over in my career. So that worked out well. I mean, and that was kind of interesting because it wasn't animation, but because I knew animation a little bit, I could kind of put that into the layout drawings and stuff. So that was fun. And I did that. I don't think I even made it through the whole season before I got the call from Ralph to come back and be the animation director for Fire and Ice. Wow. So
that must have been something to also get to work with Frazetta.
Yes, absolutely. To work with Frank and deal with him a little bit. So yeah.
And I remember a while ago, probably somewhere buried on your feed was you posted a bunch of drawings, I think, that he had done to explain his stylization to the animators, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth and trying to pick his brain because he never had to think about it before. Right. So especially when it came to women, the Tigra character, it was a lot of back and forth. Eventually, I besides being animation director, I ended up having to be help with the model sheets, do the turns on them, because he'd give us like one or two beautiful drawings, but they weren't animation drawings. Excuse me. So I'd have to work on those. And then to keep the film consistent, what I was doing was I was keying every scene of animation. It was rotoscope, but I'd go through and I'd pick out photos and I'd key them to pull them on model because they didn't look like that, like the character designs. They didn't look like Frazetta characters. They were just, normal humans.
Right.
So I'd have to key everything, but that was keeping me so busy that we all felt that it was best for us to find someone to do Tigra and zero in on just that character. So we went through a lot of people before we found someone that could do it. Dave Stevens was there at one point, and I think he got too busy, I believe, doing storyboards for, I don't know what it was, something else. Or maybe he started on his Rocketeer. I'm not really sure at that time. But he was in there for a little bit, and I think that was where he met Frank for the first time.
Uh-huh.
I think. Can't speak for sure, we went through Dave Hoover. He was doing some for us for a while, and I think we ended up using an animation person, a woman who just was able to capture it a little bit, and she spent hours and hours and hours with Frank trying to figure out the anatomy and what it was that made it work, because obviously the girl that was in the film that we shot didn't look like that. Clearly no one does. So she had, and Frank would constantly be contradicting himself because he wouldn't know. He didn't know what it was that made a Frazetta girl. One day, each breast is the size of her head. And then he'd come back freaked out the next day and say, no, that's not what I mean. I mean, he'd come in with, he'd rethink what he was saying, and he just never had to explain himself before. So
yeah, I find that to me that's one of the most interesting things about that project is the fact that you have a guy who made these amazing comics or amazing still image illustrations that have a lot of very idiosyncratic stylizations. Like he would very famously do a character from the side, and then he wouldn't draw anything that was on the far side. Like he'd take the leg off, he'd take an arm off. You didn't really notice it, but once you notice it, it's like something that he did to get the shapes right. So it's like was like a feeling guy. It was like he could sit down and draw probably 100 women, and they would all be Frazetta women, but they're not. It's not like Gil Kane where there's like a system where he like built.
He had no formula that he was aware of.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense of one by the time the project was wrapping?
The one that was doing the drawing sure did, I think. At some point, she no longer needed him to sit by her side, obviously. And I don't even know if she's still in the business. Her name was Debbie Hayes, and she did a great job. It was a tough job, and she managed to get through it. But yeah, it's really hard to say what obviously I started picking up on some things for his men and stuff that I knew that he needed to do. There's the whole lip thing and the or the no bottom lip, or the he liked to have clunky feet or boots. That's why I put boots on a lot of characters, because he hated bare feet. He kind of thought they weren't strong enough to hold a character up, especially one of his characters. So he liked to put heavy boots on people and stuff. So
that's really interesting.
Kind of weight them down.
Yeah.
Things like that. And obviously he spent a lot of time with the background painters, James Gurney and Tom Kincaid.
Yeah, well, I remember that I found that so funny that both those guys painted backgrounds, and especially since they both kind of went in sort of like different directions, like But
Yeah.
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 So,
One figured out a way to make a lot of money, and the other one just found a way to make paint because that's what he liked doing.
right. So after you, well, I guess Bakshi kind of folded, right? He kind of folded his tent. Is that what happened?
Towards the end of that film, because that film was done for no money whatsoever, like $2 million or something, and he was in discussions at one point with ERB, Burroughs, about possibly doing a Frazetta inspired Princess of Mars the same way, through rotoscope and stuff. But he at that point, I think, was tired. He really had no interest in doing it. So he was talking to me and another animator, the guy who coincidentally I had started in-betweening for. And he was now working under me on Fire and Ice as one of my animators. And he was talking to us about directing a Princess of Mars. But, I think that all kind of fell through because the money just wasn't worth it for Ralph to do and stuff. So it's just, he wanted to get out of doing that type of film, the cheap, no money film and, working your brains out to try to get it done. So, yeah. So after that, I went off to, I think from there ended up at Disney, mostly because of Fire and Ice in a way, because they were doing Black Cauldron.
Oh, okay.
So they saw a similarity, and Mike Plug was doing some character design on Black Cauldron, and they knew I had an association with Mike from Lord of the Rings and stuff. So I was hired to essentially to just do the henchmen on Black Cauldron, but they moved me off of that at some point because I started doing other things just because the henchmen weren't necessarily ready. So I ended up animating a lot of Terran and a lot of mostly Horn King. I was kind of one of the key animators on the Horn King. So
I'm really interested in the fact that now all through this you kept thinking that at some point you would go back eventually to Art Center.
Well, I think at that point I gave up. I followed her. I assumed she knew more what she was talking about. And plus, at that point, during Fire and Ice, I got married and we had a kid and stuff. So at that point, things start to gel a little more in your head and realize, maybe art school is not the place. Plus, I started to meet a lot more illustrators and realizing, boy, that's a really hard field to make any money. And that was when people were still hiring illustrators. So,
right. So this is like the mid 80s, right? Early 80s. Yeah. And ironically, like you said, at that time, that's when a lot of the old school guys like Bama and people like James Bama and those guys stopped doing illustration and started doing Western art.
Right. Yeah. Which I always found interesting. I thought, well, maybe that's something I should think about. See, must be a lot of money in that.
Yeah. I think they would take the same skill set that they would use to paint a paperback cover, and then they would go and they would paint a large oil, like Howard Turpning and guys like that would do these large oils of Indians and really research it, go all out. And they were very successful. They made more money doing that than they would have done trying to finding covers for Time or something.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure. Yeah. And plus, that they could count on selling every painting they did, as opposed to having to wait for someone an art director or something to call them and hope that they could get more than one cover of a book to do or something,
Right.
Stephen, I have a question for you, and this is interesting. Sure. I'm kind of like the caulk in the tile guy here on the show. I'm always asking these like in between questions. So was there ever a point, because it seemed like you were really busy for the especially the beginning part of your career, was there ever a point where you're kind of like, oh, well, this gig is ending and everybody here in the studio seems like they're now looking for other things. Should I be doing that too? Or were you always kind of like maybe like less with the next gig and the next gig? Did you have a moment where you had to start thinking about what was next?
Early on, it didn't concern me too much because I had money in the bank, and but I saw everyone else scrambling for jobs, so that's why I even applied at Filmation, because I heard people going there and applying, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll try that too, see if I can get a gig. I did, and as it worked out, it was fortuitous for me because I met my wife there. So,
I'm glad you brought that up, because I had another question about the Filmation thing. Because from Bakshi's studio into this, you just started doing character design, and was that just something you just walked in with and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this," or "I can do this"?
Didn't do character design at Filmation.
Oh, what did you do there?
I did character layout.
I'm sorry, layout.
Yeah,
I was wondering about the skill transition between what you were doing into going into Filmation.
Well, the character layout. Well, actually, it wasn't character layout. It was just layout. That's what I'm going to say. And basically, it's you have, the only difference is you'd have to draw the backgrounds and stuff, and have to figure out the camera moves and stuff and whatnot. And coming from Bakshi's, obviously I never had to do that. So I had to learn pretty quickly to build that skill set up. So
awesome, thanks.
So you were primarily doing figures when you were working with Bakshi,
right?
Then now you've got to learn how to put the character in the background. Right,
exactly. I had to. You had to set up. I was handed field guides and stuff. Like, I've never had to use field guides, so I had to start from that, which is it was a good thing to learn, because it helped me in my next jobs and whatever else, and allowed me to figure out other things. So it was good to learn, especially at such a simple place as Filmation, where things were pretty, A plus B, or
Before we get any deeper, we have a bunch of questions that are starting to stack up.
Okay.
So I want to try to knock some of these out. Steve, if you'd like to be a dear.
Yeah,
Sure.
we got a few. I was looking for the let's start with Gar on YouTube. Asks, were the dance scenes for Hollywood rotoscoped or just referenced like the dance scenes for Rogue and Kitty in Evolution?
I think it's referencing Cool World.
Yeah.
Hollywood. There was rotoscope shot, but like Fire and Ice and like the stuff I did in Evolution, they were just used as reference more than anything. It was interesting how this is all pre-computer on Cool World, so Ralph would have to shoot the scene twice. If Holly was dancing with Brad Pitt's character, he would have to shoot it once with the actress playing Holly, and it wasn't Kim Basinger, it was another actress, an actual dancer. And then he would have to shoot it again with Brad trying to remember, or Gabriel Byrne or whoever, remembering what they did previously with the actress. So it was but then we'd be given the footage, both footages, I guess, and have to find a way to combine them and make it work, because often, the live actor is way off, what he remembered, and we had to somehow try to make it work and stuff. But, and the dancing, just to make dancing work, you can't just follow live action. You have to push it and make it interesting and extreme and whatnot. You can always tell when someone has just not pushed it when they're doing rotoscope and stuff, and it really glares. It looks very uncanny valley, even back then. So
that's very cool. And also with that, and Steve, if you have one more, I was thinking, because it seems like you're known a lot for your the rhythm in your dance scenes and things like that. Was that something that you just naturally picked up, or was that something that you may have been taught a little bit in studio, or is it just a natural thing? I know, I can see how this works.
I'm quite the dancer in real life. No, it's something I just kind of picked up on. I think my first dancing stuff was on Hey Good Looking. If you're familiar with that show, there's a sequence where I can't think of the group, the Lockers, I think. They're a group that was run by group of dancers run by what's that? The girl who sang that "Mickey, You're So Fine" song.
Tony Basil, right?
Yeah, Tony Basil. You're right.
Yeah.
It was her group along with someone else, but hers is the only name I recall. It's barely that, obviously. But so that was the first dancing I did, and then or was it American Pop? I don't remember. I don't know which one came first, but either way, I did a lot of the dancing in American Pop, and I did a lot of the dancing and did the dancing in Hey Good Looking, and so it kind of just something I was comfortable with, and that along with doing animals, it seemed to be sort of my thing.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right, Steve.
We got another one from Gar again on YouTube. You worked on animated features that starred human characters. Any thoughts on why they're so loved by fans, but not as commercially successful as the talking animal features?
Wow, don't know. Unfortunately, most of the films that I've worked on were just not terribly successful films for one reason or another. I don't know if it had anything to do with them being human and not talking animals, or not. I never thought about that. Was there
but they were getting you more work. So they clearly were, were they artists, like sometimes an artist? Were these like animations, that kind of thing, that you were being part of those projects propelled you or helped propel you for the next project?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously, like, I got hired on Black Cauldron at Disney because I was a human animator. A lot of the people at Disney didn't necessarily, that wasn't their thing. I mean, they no longer had the 9 old men there, and a lot of the people there were like funny animal animators and that type of stuff, softer animators, talking animal animators. So when they saw my stuff, I guess they hired me off the street to be an animator, which wasn't being done then, actually, and pissed off quite a few people there. But so I did go from one job to the next because of that level of draftsmanship and ability to do humans and stuff, even though I'm comfortable doing funny animals and other things as well. But it seems to be what gets me my gigs.
Typecast.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
I find that also very interesting that you do animals, you do people, but you also do what they would call Bigfoot, funny animal stuff. And there's not a lot of people in the business outside of like the 9 old men could do anything. They could do funny stuff or whatever. But it seemed like, especially I remember when the Black Cauldron was coming out, Disney was really kind of struggling at that time as a studio to do stuff like that, because they didn't have the bench that they had once had.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was an odd period for Disney. Obviously, it was kind of the tipping point. But when you look at it, the films that they'd done just prior to that, the Black Cauldron was a humongous leap as far as what they were trying to get done. I mean, this is the first film, they did Fox and the Hound before that, Aristocats, very soft films. Mm-hmm. So this was a very hard film for them. This one actually had a character arc, a character story where, basically, I'm not saying they did it well, but the fact that they even attempted it was pretty beyond what Disney was doing at the time. And for generations, they hadn't been doing this for decades, where you got a main character who wants to go off and fight in the war and discovers that fighting in wars is scary and dangerous and shitty. Mm-hmm. And for Disney to be doing that, that's like, wow, that's storytelling that you haven't been doing at all a long time, if ever, So, I mean, there was a lot, and I think there's a lot of hard, they were having trouble adapting to that concept of doing that type of a film. And there was a lot of infighting and a lot of, going back and forth between the bunch of cliques and groups and stuff as to how to get it done. And, even on the film itself, you watch it, there were 3 directors originally. Well, originally there were multiple directors, but there were 3 directors by the time I got there, and one of them was taken off. Art Stevens was moved off it at some point. But the 2 directors, Rick Rich and Ted, oh God, blanking on his name now. Anyway, the other director, Ted would do the very hard edge stuff, and Rick was kind of thinking that it was more like a Disney softer film. So he would do the softer stuff and whatnot. So, so I'd kind of bounce back and forth between the 2 of them, depending on what it was, but eventually I started getting known, like I said before, as the Horn King, one of the Horn King guys. And I started, whenever someone needed a Horn King sequence or something, like I ended up doing the death of the Horn King and the fight with Terran at the end. But that was all Ted. And all I can think of is Ted Lasso. And I know that's not his name.
I was so excited for that movie to come out. I think I was reading every Star Log or whatever it was, like trying to get every glimpse of.
Yeah, sure.
And was it the first non-musical?
I think it was. Like I said, I mean, it was a leap beyond anything they were doing, what they'd done previously. I mean, the previous film was Fox and the Hound, and the small one, So it's like, you're talking about like, wow, this is a new Disney. If they'd been successful at it,
right?
They may have started doing films like Pocahontas and Hunchback a lot sooner. So, because that was kind of the direction they were going in initially. So, and then, then once they did do a Little Mermaid, they did start to understand story structure, where you have a character wanting versus their need and stuff. And I think a lot of that was introduced by the song people, because they had a background with Broadway and stuff, and they understood that type of story structure. So.
Right. So really working in the business was you were educated by doing all of these various jobs and the different companies, and you would learn something here that you would apply to there, and then you would take that and learn another skill, like doing layout and things. Of course, nobody does that anymore, but or they certainly don't do it on
Simpsons
TV.
I understand.
Okay, well, they probably only people left probably have a budget.
Yeah,
yeah, I did a little bit of that on Clone Wars.
Yeah,
I think because it's so complex with all that stuff that can be.
Well, it's a great way to ensure quality. I mean, when I was doing a bunch of after Cauldron and stuff, Rick Rich left, one of the directors of Cauldron, to form his own company, and he started doing these directive videos. Most of them were religious, but some were historical and whatnot. Before we did Swan Princess, and we found that doing storyboards wasn't working. I mean, we needed to, after the storyboard phase, we needed to go in and do character layout, all layout. And we had a background guy who did all the backgrounds and set it all up. And then I'd go in and basically key all the character layouts. And that sure ensured quality of a higher level than we were getting before we put that into effect. And that lasted for up until Swan Princess that we were doing that. That was several years worth of work. So.
And that would be on a feature, that would be hundreds and hundreds of drawings. Right?
Oh yeah. You wouldn't want to do that on a feature necessarily. I mean, I sort of did that on Fire and Ice a little bit by keying everything, and Dale Bear did a little bit of that on Lord of the Rings because he was the character designer on Lord of the Rings. But it's I mean, basically you want to hire the animators, the best animators and stuff, and if you're going the route of a cleanup artist, you want to hire good cleanup artists and stuff. I mean, to key the scenes prior to that, it would be just ridiculous. You couldn't manage that. I don't know how whether the Simpsons did that for their feature or not, but that would be crazy. So.
Right. So, you moved on. You kept moving on, and sort of like a journeyman, right? I mean, you were learning on every job,
Yeah.
taking that skill set to the next job. Also, I guess you were networking too, because all the people that you work with, that's the thing about animation that I learned, is that, you know, people I worked with in like 1996, they're everywhere. So if you've got a good reputation, you're a nice person, people like you, then you've got all these contacts all over the business. So
Yeah.
it seemed like that must have been.
Well, it was a very small business back then too. I mean, there were like 600 people in the union, I think, or something, and a large percentage of them were ink and painters. So the amount of actual animators and stuff and people doing the actual drawings was pretty small. So you could know almost everyone in the business to a degree.
Wow.
You know, especially if you managed to go through Disney. I mean, I met a lot of people at Disney that I'm still in contact with. And in fact, I just, you know, if you know who ANASTASIA is, I just did I helped him do a couple scenes on his short that he came out with last year and stuff.
Right. Okay.
So you know, you stay in contact, and plus, you know, stay in contact with them via Facebook, which has been great. That's become kind of the new networking. So it's all networking. I tell anyone asking how to find work and stuff, like you gotta find people and network with them, and you know, make sure that they like you, or you're not too big of an asshole. And frankly, if you've been in the business long enough, you're going to get some reputation. You know, someone's not going to like you, or someone's going to feel intimidated by you, or you're going to insult someone by accident, or you know.
I wanted to ask a kind of like a studio question, Steve. As you've been in the business for a few different eras, how do you feel technology has changed maybe the studio system or even the way you approach projects now?
Well, obviously, digital has changed everything. There's no 2D animation really in America, and when there is, it's still run digitally. You know, and there's digital software for animation. But yeah, I'd use that on Space Jam 2 when I was animating on that. And so it's not too much different than paper stuff, but still there's nothing quite like working on paper with pencil. But in a lot of ways, I think digital has helped a lot. I mean, I'd hate to think what would have happened during the lockdown if we hadn't had digital handy, because everything suddenly turned digital, and now we're, you know, I haven't been back in the studio since before the lockdown.
Wow. The before times. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the case. I mean, the studio I'm working with, Wild Canary, I mean, everyone is basically work from home. Wow. You know, I'm directing on a show, a series, and it's, you know, I'm able to do it via Zoom calls and Slack and all these different methods of talking to people, and, you know, sync sketch and whatnot. And just on a personal note, I find I like digital because mistakes are a lot easier to fix. And, you know, I do a little bit of comic work as a side gig here and there, and or if I had to ink it, normally I think I'd be awful. You know, I've tried that, and I just don't have that skill set. I'm not Dave Stevens by any means. Who is, I guess, but still. But you know, digital, I can do pretty decently. You know, I can, you know, with a Photoshop and brushes and you know, Control Z and stuff.
Yeah, undo is pretty great.
Yeah. You can go way back if you want to. And now I find myself at conventions and stuff when I'm not doing digital, obviously for commissions.
Do you do many conventions?
Yeah, I do a lot of conventions. But I find myself when I put a line down and think, oh shit, I can't get rid of it.
That's funny. And even with the technology question, I know things have kind of come and gone. Like I remember when, the lunchbox was a big thing everybody was into, and then Toon Boom showed up, and, now we're off on to maybe something else. And have you felt that you've ever had any kind of like learning curve with trying to keep up with this tech stuff, or you've been pretty smooth with it?
Well, to some degree. I mean, I was an early adopter. When I was on Swan Princess, I was the animation director and doing animation as well, key animation. I was working from home most of the time, and I had a Amiga that I jerry-rigged to do pencil tests and sound, and you had to have this component plugged into that, and kind of, and a camera attached, and so I was heavily into all that type of stuff. And since then, unfortunately, I missed the jump to CG animation. Most of the people, the 2D animators that jumped to CG, were people that were already working at studios like Disney or DreamWorks, and they paid for them to learn. So that's sure makes a big difference in trying to learn on your own and on your own dime. But I've done everything else. I've learned how to use Harmony, Toon Boom Harmony to animate. I've learned Toon Boom Storyboard Pro, and don't particularly care for it, but it's there, and I know how to use it. So yeah, I don't get too deep down that rabbit hole, but I definitely I know what I need to know to do what I need to do.
Did you ever get kind of approached with the Flash wave when that was a thing?
No, that somehow I missed that. I think I was busy doing other things when that was happening. So
probably for the best, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, since it's not really a thing. Although I still see people talking about, oh yeah, we're doing this all through Flash. It's like, really?
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I remember actually 2000 I took a class on doing Flash, because when I started working in boarding and everything, I was thinking like, well, I could do my own shorts. And everything was Flash at that time, until suddenly like everything wasn't Flash. But that's sort of the other interesting part of your career, because you've gone through all these different revolutions. We're going through another one now, because, like you said, because of the pandemic. A lot of the studios are saying like, well, gee, I don't have to air condition this big giant building and have 10,000 Cintiqs. You buy the Cintiq, you pay for the electricity.
Yeah, sure.
We'll get a server, and you put everything on the server. We will still own everything, but that seems to be like a real hybrid model that a lot of people are working on.
Yeah, I think I would assume the studios must like that. I think the only reason why they wanted us in before was because they didn't trust us. We wanted to make sure we were sitting at our desks and stuff when we were supposed to. And then I think during the pandemic, they realized, oh, I guess we can trust them. The work's coming in. Who cares when they're doing it? And in some ways, I suspect it benefits them, other than the fact that they don't have to lease a big building. Right before the lockdown, I was at the DreamWorks. They had this a building that most of their TV stuff was in. It wasn't even on campus. It was in Glendale or something. It was just an awful building. I mean, the building was nice, but the setup was awful. I mean, they had this storyboard artist sitting in this weird horseshoe configuration. You were almost shoulder to shoulder. It was just, I hated that. So I was very happy to see that was going away. So, but
I was going to ask if you went stir crazy at all with the, but it sounds like no, not like
working from home?
Yeah, working from home.
No, I think during Fire and Ice, I was working at home. I was taking home stuff and working at home even then. So I've been doing it for decades. And, when computers became the thing, I was working on computers even before Cintiqs were around. I would sometimes use I'd get, when the Wacom's first came out, and I developed a hand-eye coordination. You could do that. Yeah. whatnot. And, so I've been using it for quite a while. I scan my drawings in and fix them in Photoshop but so I've been doing it for decades. So I already, by the time the lockdown happened, I was all set up. I was ready to go and already had high speed and, high, a big hard drive and, external hard drives all set up, ready to go. So it was no big deal. The one nice thing is that even though, and it's still a huge cost savings, but the union studios pay you a rental fee. If you're using your own equipment, they have to pay
really?
a rental fee. Yeah, which came from the live action storyboards more than anything. When you're live action storyboard, they pay your. I think they would call it a rental box. And that probably started way back when you'd actually walk in with a box of stuff. But it kind of carried over, and now carried over into animation as well, where they have to pay you a certain amount. It's a negotiable fee. It depends on what the deal is, but they do have to cover you a little bit since you're using your own equipment and your own power and everything else. So.
Right. So you've gone all the way through. You did in betweening, and then you learned how to animate. You learned the principles of animation. You learned how to animate. You're doing layout. You're doing character designs, and then you moved to do directing.
Yeah, I started doing. I directed on Mighty Mouse. I think that might have been my first gig, but that was kind of
the Bakshi Mighty Mouse.
Yeah.
I love that stuff so much.
Yeah, they hired me and another animator, once again the same friend that I started in betweening for, to basically pick up the slack, because it was a John Kay. Ralph had basically, it was John Kay, and I don't know if you know who Eddie Fitzgerald is, and Ralph did not feel secure that they would meet deadlines or anything else, so he brought in basically a couple of ringers that he knew he could trust to get the stuff done and on schedule and on screen. So we kind of brought in to do that. So I started doing that. And then I think my next job was for kind of a fun project for Saban that was called Pigs Next Door. I don't think it, you know that one?
I don't think I've seen that one. No.
It started as a comic strip, I believe. For some reason, Saban didn't like it, and it never came out here. It was only shown overseas, I believe, in Germany, or overseas in general. I still get residuals on it occasionally, but it was kind of great. It had John Goodman, Jamie Lee Curtis.
Wow.
Almost an entire name cast on it. And it was fun because it was about a family of pigs that moved into a human neighborhood, and they kind of stood in for any type of minority you wanted them to be for that episode. Sometimes they were clearly being handled as blacks. Sometimes not acting black, but getting the shit that would be thrown at blacks, or sometimes Jews, sometimes Asians. So it was kind of a great idea. And for whatever reason, Chaim Saban didn't think it was funny enough or something. So he just, or maybe it was a way to make his taxes work better. I don't know. But that was sort of my first big show. Mighty Mouse was kind of a one-off type of thing. But then from there, a friend that I worked with, we were going to start doing Avengers. Saban was already doing some Avengers type show, but he was going to take it over. This friend of mine, Boyd Kirkland, and he wanted me to help him on it. And I think before that happened, he got offered to do X-Men Evolution. So I went over and, he hired me to be one of the directors on X-Men Evolution. And then eventually he decided I was also the right person to be the character designer. So
that's fantastic. Well,
Boyd used to work with Tim and those guys, Dini, on the Batman stuff.
Yes, yeah, he was one of the directors on Batman.
Yeah,
Boyd has had an interesting career. I mean, he started out in Utah doing. He co-owned a company called ZAM that basically did layout for like I think Ruby Spears and stuff, and then he came out here and he worked under me at Rich Animation when we were doing his direct-to-videos and stuff, because he felt he wanted to learn more about character work and stuff. He wanted to get better at his character work, so he did that, and then he stayed out here and moved into directing and stuff, so and producing.
I have a question from Gar, and Gar's like the MVP tonight. And sorry, I seem to be leaning on Gar's questions, and there's other people who have asked questions. Gar asks, your designs for Evolution are gorgeous. Do you remember locking down the looks quickly, or was there a lot of rework demands from the studio?
Well, on Evolution, like I said, I wasn't the character designer initially. I wasn't hired to be the character designer. I'm not quite sure what Boyd had in mind about character design. But me and he had me and Frank Parr. He was another director. Kind of, just shooting a lot of junk out there, seeing what worked, what didn't. We kind of knew what we didn't want to do, which was anything that was done previously in comics or in the '90s show. We wanted to kind of go completely opposite of that. And so we were kind of trying to find ways to do that. And at some point, it became clear that I had the best take on how to handle the characters. Some of the early uniforms, like Cyclops and even Rogue's uniform, I think Frank came up with, because he was much more into comics than I was at that point. At that point, I hadn't looked at X-Men comics since Kirby and Lee were on it. So
wow,
I had very little. I vaguely knew who Wolverine may have been, and but I confused him with how the new version of the Beast, because they sort of had the same hairstyle, and I don't know.
That's right.
So, but at some point, it became clear that how I handled the characters and stuff was the right way to go. And after I nailed Rogue with that whole goth look, then the others started to come easier. Once we had that direction in mind and stuff. And there were still a few characters that were difficult to pin down, but essentially that was the tipping point. So once we had Rogue, we knew where we were going.
I wondered if your designs, or how complex the designs were also based upon where you knew you were getting it animated and the budget for the animation, because I know one of the things that Tim did was he kept constantly tweaking his designs, because if it was animated at TMS, those episodes looked beautiful. Those guys could do great stuff on the TV budget. And then you would see other stuff where it was like the same character designs, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? What's going over on here,
Yeah, I mean, that's the nasty truth about, TV animation, especially during that period, the late 90s and the early 2000s, that you got what you paid for as far as the studio, and sometimes that was even a crapshoot, because each studio had their A, B, and C teams.
Right.
And we had pretty good people, pretty good two studios, two Korean studios. Well, one of them was Japanese that basically outsourced to a Korean studio, but on Evolution. But the plan even before that was not worrying about what they could or couldn't do, is worrying what I could do. As an animator, I wanted to make these designs so that I could animate them. Make sure that they were simple enough and they had enough appeal that I could repeat, the designs over and over. And that worked in our favor when it went overseas to a large degree. I mean, they animated them up a little bit. They got a little more in that anime vein than what I gave them, but we accepted that, knowing that that was still a decent level that we were happy with. So. But yeah, mainly it was like I wanted to make sure that it was stuff that I could, if I were to have to animate any of it, which I did some, as it turned out, with dancing and stuff, that I would be happy with it. So
Right. But I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people who want to do character animation or character design, I should say, don't really realize that that's like a really important step in designing something that will work with the budget and the people that you're working with. I mean, if it's CGI, once you get it into the computer, okay, you're still dealing with animation. But
even then you'd be surprised. I mean, I did some stuff on CG shows that, boy, some of the rules are almost more restrictive. You can have patterns and stuff which are fun, but boy, some of the rules that you have to follow to make sure that things aren't overlapping the wrong way, or it's crazy. But it helps if you have an idea of who you're sending it to. And we always knew it was going overseas on X-Men Evolution, so we knew we had to be judicious in what we gave them, and make sure that the thing that I always felt about overseas animation, if you sent them a human figure, then and it didn't have anything unique about it, they would give you back their version of a human figure. So you had to come up with something, I mean, sort of what Bruce was doing, which was like, this is an extreme, more of a design concept. We didn't quite go to that degree, but we did have certain rules, like short torsos, long legs, and,
right.
This is how the hands work. This is how the ears work. You have to give them rules, and otherwise they will make them up on their own. If you just send them over, like, this is what happened with the 90s show. You send them over, these are human looking characters. They will give you their version of them, good or bad.
Right, because if they don't have something that explains that, they have to come up with it themselves.
Right, exactly, yeah. And often they just will fall back on what they're comfortable with.
Right. One of the things that was, I guess, sort of a shocking thing in a way was when I started. Everybody knows Toth's, brilliant drawings for those shows on those model sheets, but then you realize that how inconsistent they are, and they don't really. Some of them don't turn at all. It's like he's got all these heads, but like actually, if you turn that guy's head, it would be so distorted. But it looks great from like those deadlocked angles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so that was sort of I really learned a lot on my first show, which was Superman. Really seeing like, wow, they really explained when you would get the model sheets. They were really explaining hands and knuckles and, like you said, ears and things you wouldn't think that you would have to. But you were right. If you didn't explain how to break down that hand or how to break down the ear, they would just draw whatever weird anime ear, ear, and it would change from scene to scene.
Yeah, no, there's a lot more involved than I think the average person realizes. So yeah, you have to be very careful about how you design. And he loved Toph's stuff, but he was not ever an animator, and so that unfortunately means that he doesn't know really how to move that head in 3 dimensions, other than what looks good from one drawing to the next. So it's I always find the best character designers are someone who is ready to actually animate it and move it.
Right.
So, because then they know that there's certain problems that they're going to encounter and they're going to have to deal with. So
what advice would you give to, because it seems like that was always the thing that because I used to teach a high school class, everybody wanted to be a character designer because they thought it would just be the most easy, fun job. You're just going to sit down and just,
you get all the groupies and
yeah. So what are some principles, some things that you learned coming up the way that you did that are really important to doing good character designs?
Well, it depends on what the intention is for the final look. I mean, if you're doing CG, it's different than if it's 2D, or and if you're doing The Simpsons, it's different than if you're doing Adventure Time, obviously, which is kind of design work. It just depends on what the ultimate goal is. If you're doing stuff like what I do, which is, like X-Men Evolution's look and whatnot, then it's important to have a good understanding of how that character is going to rotate around and move. And if you have to cheat something, you have to rethink, okay, if that's a cheat, is it going to be a problem at some point? Even Mickey Mouse's ears, for example, those are cheats.
Right.
And they, at some point, they had to figure out how to make that work for head turns. And that's the type of thing you have to constantly keep in mind when you're doing character designs, if it's in 2D. Obviously, if it's in CG, you have to work in 3 dimensions, no matter what you do. You have to constantly worry about that. And it always works best if you can work back and forth with the modeler a little bit, because they will help point out things that oh shit, I didn't think of that.
All right, so guys, we're running out of runway, and there's a lot of questions we have in the chat. Steve, I want to check in on you. How you feeling?
I'm okay. I'm good.
All right, cool. All right. Well, if everybody's cool with it, I am going to enact. This is the lightning round. This is Question Palooza. I'm going to give it up to Stone Cold to select questions for you.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions, and Gar is going to get some more screen time at some point through this. So I appreciate all these great questions. We're going to go back to kind of the beginning of a discussion about working in the same studio with Dave and Russ. Tim Fielder on Facebook asks, so were you looking at the Star Wars work that Dave and Russ worked on at that time?
I did not see anything that Russ was doing on that, but Dave would constantly be bringing in stuff that he was inking and stuff, and working it. That is all pre-Rocketeer, of course. He was doing some follow-up inking for the strip and whatnot, and so that was always fun. It was always great to watch Dave do his inking, and his just sense of wrinkles and folds and all that stuff just blew me away, because in animation you tend to avoid those things, but he didn't.
Beautiful. Jamal on Facebook says, how did you get involved in the Animated Heroes Classic series, specifically the Harriet Tubman episode?
Well, those were all being done by Rick Rich in his company, his studio, after he left Disney, or was fired from Disney. He started up a company and got backing from a group in Utah. I think they were called Nest then too, but they were funding all these direct-to-videos. And a lot of them were, like I said, religious videos, and they also wanted to do historical ones. So, yeah, he hired me to freelance on the first one he did way back, doing character design, and then he got a good enough budget to hire me full time. So I was with him doing that all the way through, up to and through Swan Princess. Swan Princess is all being done by the same people.
Oh, wow. See, Jamal, back to back. How was your collaboration? We haven't talked about children's books. Do you have a preference? Children's books versus animation?
Well, the children's books were fun. I was able to do the DC characters, which I hadn't really done much of prior to that. Mostly DC characters. And so that was fun. And plus, it was illustration, which is always kind of what I wanted to do, which was fun. And plus, I was able to get my son involved, too. He did a lot of the color for him. He was much more versatile in Photoshop than I was, and plus the deadlines and stuff, because that was kind of a side gig. So I'd do that in my off hours after work or before work and stuff, and really enjoyed it. Because you don't have as many people breathing down your neck, making changes. I had an art director, and I'd get one set of notes from them, and then they'd be happy. So it was kind of fun. So I'd love to do them again. Plus the pay at that point was really nice.
Is your son still doing work in the field?
Well, he's not in animation. He was doing it for a while. He was my color person on the Stan Lee Condor movie.
Oh, wow.
Video. And then he moved up north to Portland, and he's now working at Nike. And there's some sort of CG department there or something. So he learned CG and got all that under his belt and stuff. So
That's great. Eternity Forever on YouTube says X-Men Evolution was incredible. Why did it look digital? Was it done digitally and traditionally?
Well, it was not done digitally because there was no digital back then. So if it looks digital, I mean, I think the color was done digitally. I think that was the most anyone was doing in those days, and that was digital paint overseas. Other than that, it was all being done the traditional way for the most part.
That's great.
So,
what do we got? I think we're a question about AI. Can't get out of any episode without getting AI in these things. Tim, futurist on Facebook, wondering if you saw the AI animated work done by Corridor Crew, anime rock paper scissors.
Have not seen it, but I'm sure I would hate it. So, do not like AI or what it means or anything else. And frankly, I don't think we're going to see a lot of AI until they figure out how to make it copyrightable, which I think is the one thing we have in our favor right now. So
that's great. And I think this is our last one for the Question Palooza. Gar, MVP, what would be your dream project to work on animation-wise? Like just the Phantom, Princess of Mars, classic monsters?
Yeah, I'll take no. No, I'd love to do something with Princess of Mars. That would be wonderful. I've always wanted to, even when I was a kid. I got into kind of all that fantasy stuff when I was like in my, elementary school. So I'd love to do that. And also another project, I had optioned a Stephen King book, like a decade and a half ago or so, and lost the option, unfortunately, but I always wanted to do that, and I still kind of poke around to see if I can pick the option back up. So,
oh wow! So when you pick up one of these options, you have it. You're like, okay, next meeting I'm going to keep coming back.
Well, in that case, then this was all before anyone was doing anything remotely adult animation wise, other than what Batchy did and stuff. Now it'd be easy, but then I kept running into, we had to find financing for it. And I kept running into people who said, oh, yeah, this is great. This is a wonderful idea. I'm sure it'd be great. But we want to give you money, but we don't want to be first money. We want to be second money, which is something when you're doing financing, usually you get more than one source of money. And, first money is the important money. Then if you can find first money, then second money is relatively easy. No one wants to be first.
That's very true. Everybody's in a race to be second, right?
Yeah. So,
well, we'll just get one last in here. We're going to squeak this in. Francis on YouTube. We want to make sure I get this edition.
Oh, there you go.
You talked about networking earlier. I'm not sure any advice. What's the best place to meet people in the industry of illustration and also animation?
Right now, Facebook, LinkedIn. I would go to, depends on where you are located, but if you can make your way to CTNX, I don't even know if they're doing it again this year. I assume they will, but she's basically turned it into less of a con or expo and more of a way for young people to get introduced and learn and get scholarships and stuff, more of a charitable endeavor. So I would look at that. And cons in general, any con that you're near that, has artists at it, I think that's a good way to network and talk. And you're not going to get hired probably by just meeting someone, but knowing someone and see if you can get them to look at your stuff at some point. It's important though, not just to use people. It's important to interact with them and not just show up whenever you need work.
Well, thank you for the question, Francis, and thank you everybody for those great questions.
Yeah, thank you, guys. We're gonna put a pin in this. This was perfect. chef's kiss of an episode. Thank you so much. Mike, do you have any last words to bring Stephen?
Well, I guess two things. I know we were talking about the AI thing. And I'm talking to a lot of people in Hollywood. And they say Hollywood's a little bit slow right now, and I'm wondering if you're experiencing that also. I think you're right about the AI thing. The thing about AI, the thing that I've never read, is what percentage of the human must be involved. So if it's like I just have to change 3 I's in the script by hand, now it's copyrightable. There's not been anything I've seen yet that says it has to be X amount human. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't know, and there must be some level. I assume it's got to be the preponderance of the amount of percentage that has to be human generated as opposed to machine generated. But I don't know. I haven't seen anything specific yet. You're right.
Right. So I mean, I know that I'm sure every studio is trying to figure out exactly like who they can replace on the chain with the
sure
with the computer. But we should also talk about your newest gig, even though you told us you can't talk a lot about it. But you're doing what's your newest gig that you're working on?
Yeah, I am directing an episode director on a show for Disney Junior through another studio, Wild Canary, called Ariel, which is about the Little Mermaid as a little girl. It will be on, it's a preschool show, she's 8 years old or something. And it will be, I believe, premiering sometime this summer on Disney Junior channel.
Very cool.
And then, so things are good.
Did you do character designs on that too, or?
I did not. No, we have some beautiful character designers that are much better at that type of thing than I am. Little kid stuff, very pretty and stuff, and much more capable of that than I am. I hope. I don't know. Maybe I'm sure if they hired me, I'd find a way to do it. But they have not hired me to do that, which is great. I'm happy doing the direction.
Great. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
And Steve, any last pieces?
No, I mean, people I'm more than glad to have people check out my website, which you've posted here several times. And from there, I think they can reach my store Envy. If not, then Googling my name, my full name will get them there. And, and if you see me at a con, feel free to say hi and buy a commission.
What's your next con?
I think I might have some smaller ones coming up, but the next big one is San Diego. So I will have a booth in the illustrators section or wherever that is. It's right next to Chris Sanders. So.
Oh, okay. Do you do Lightbox?
No, I do not do Lightbox, and there's a story behind why, and I probably not best to discuss here.
Fair enough. All right. Well, Steve, you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Giving us your insight.
My pleasure. This has been fun.
Thank you. Well, we'll have to have you back if you'd like.
No, I'm always around. This is easy.
Not next week, but like.
Okay. Yes, that's probably good.
We'll give you a break. So thank you guys so much. We'll be back here next week. We're lining up guests as we speak, and we have no one to say yet. But a couple of people already in the chat says, you know what? I make sure I turn in live when you have a guest. When it's just you three.
Yeah.
So I would love to change the algorithm with that, you guys. We're in our 5th year of programming, so please share this with your constituents. We can't grow if you don't help, right? Every inch up the hill helps. So thank you guys so much. We're going to wrap this up. I've been saying these kind of apocalyptic things every week. Guys, this might be the end date, the end of time, the end game. I don't know what this is. But, until that time, and we're not walking on skulls and dodging laser fire. And Steve, you want to do this with us? This is our outro. Make sure that you wash those Kirby hands. Put some good Kirby hands. Oh, those are good.
You ever animate a Kirby hand?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Did you ever animate any Kirby stuff?
Oh, no, I have not. I always thought that would be an interesting challenge since some of his stuff is so wonky in ways.
Yeah.
All right, let's end it. All right, guys, we'll see you. We'll see you. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Take it easy.